Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Cannabis Oversight Committee meeting. I have some public comment instructions that I'm going to read out here at the onset. Please pay attention because the public comment instructions have changed slightly over the course of the last year, and so we want to make sure everyone's clear on how to participate. To enable public participation, we will receive public comment for each item on today's agenda. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes unless otherwise abbreviated by the chair. And when you have 30 seconds remaining, I will indicate that your time is almost up by ringing this bell. When your allotted time is reached, I will announce that your time is up and I will ask the next person in the queue to speak. We will take public comment from those joining us in person first, and then open up the remote access lines for those joining remotely. For those calling in to submit their testimony, please call 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code, 2490-189-7398. You may also need to enter the meeting password, 227-28732, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until the host calls on you. You will receive a request to unmute when it is your turn to comment. Please press *6 to unmute and begin your public comment. Best practices are to call from a quiet location and to please mute the volume on your computer. Once your time has elapsed, your line will be muted. These instructions will be displayed before each public comment. For those persons attending in person, please line up over here. When the public comment for the item you would like to speak to is called, please speak clearly and slowly. And if you care, you can state your name for the record. And finally, I'll ask that we silence all mobile devices that may go off during these proceedings. Please also note that committee members are not permitted to respond directly to public comments. With that, I will pass it back over to the chairperson to kick us off here.
Thank you. And with that, can we get a roll call and call to order, please?
Yes, sir. Seat 1, Mohammed Mali, or representative from the Department of Public Health, is absent.
Scott, it's one, so he'll be,
Probably will be a little late. Seat 2, Lieutenant Lang, or representative from the San Francisco Police Department, is also currently absent. C3, Stephen Kwok, or representative from the Department of Building Inspections. They did inform me that they unfortunately will not be able to attend. Matthew Chandler, or a representative from the Planning Department. I see that we do have representatives from the Planning Department here today. Representative from Seat 5, representative from the San Francisco Unified School District is also absent. Seat 6, Dylan Rice, or representative from the Entertainment Commission. He unfortunately is out of town and unable to attend. Victor Wong, or representative from the San Francisco Fire Department. I know that we have Captain Dennis Tsai on remotely. I don't know if he's.
Yeah, present.
There he is. Okay. Seat 8, Chairperson Ali Jamalian.
Present.
Seat 9, Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes.
Present.
Seat 10 is currently unfilled. Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, unfortunately, is absent today. Seat 12, Takari Donaldson.
Present.
Seat 13, David Nogales-Talley.
Present.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore.
President.
Seat 15 is currently unfilled. And seat 16, Antoinette Mobley. Antoinette, can you hear us?
Present.
Perfect. Okay, with that, we have 6 voting members present. We have established a quorum and the meeting may begin.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 1. Moving on to number 2, if you could read out the land acknowledgement, please.
Yes, sir. The San Francisco Cannabis Oversight Committee recognizes that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 3, general public comment. Members of the public may address the committee on any matters that are not on the agenda today. for a maximum of 3 minutes. With that, if you could open up for public comment, please.
Of course. For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in this corner of the room to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. I'm going to read the instructions aloud now, but for future reference, the instructions will be on the screen for you, so I won't be reading them aloud in the future. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code, 2490-189-7398. You may need to enter the meeting password, which is 227-28732, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until you hear a prompt on your phone to unmute. This is your indication that it is your turn to comment. Please press *6 to unmute and begin your public comment. Once your time has elapsed, you will be muted again. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. Chairperson, I'm just going to see if anyone has raised their hand. Not see any hands raised, and I do not see any comments in the chat.
Thank you. We'll conclude item number 3. Moving on to item number 4, consideration of the regular agenda for today. If there's any amendments or input that the members want to put in, now is the time. Otherwise, I would move to approve as is.
Second.
Can we open for public comment?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm going to put the public comment instructions on the screen again for all of our remote viewers. Please refer to the instructions on screen if you would like to call in. If there are any individuals who would like to comment about specifically the agenda items for today in person, feel free to line up in this corner and we will get to you in the order that you have. I'm going to give a few moments for anyone online who might want to provide some comments. Yes, if you would like to provide a public comment, you can feel free to step up to the podium if you like. I'll start a timer on 3 minutes. And when you have 30 seconds remaining, I will ring this bell to indicate that your time is almost up. Feel free to state your name for the record if you would like, and begin with public comment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany. I'm here to discuss the 600-foot buffer rule. Now, the intent of the buffer rule is meant to essentially protect the youth from exposure to cannabis business. In addition to regulate competitive landscape for cannabis businesses, but there needs to be flexibility for businesses located within 600 feet of each other. And this is especially important given the San Francisco limited real estate. We need leniency on this buffer rule. We need to continue to protect our youth, but we need to understand the uniqueness of the real estate issue here in San Francisco. Now, many of us in the equity applicant program, I'm one of them, 5 to 6 years now, and I am still trying to get off the ground. I had some issues with specifically the 600 buffer rule. I'm about 8 feet shy or less from another cannabis dispensary that is still in build out and has been built out for a couple of years. And I have been advised to uproot and move, but there again is the issue with valuable real estate not accessible, especially to folks in the equity program. We need improved protections. We need to preserve 100% locally owned cannabis businesses. The city should implement stronger lease protections and fair treatment for its operators. Many cannabis operators are at a disadvantage due to unfair economic practices, and we need to address these issues head on. We need to stabilize the industry and promote equity. The cannabis market here is unique. Dispensaries offer a wide range of specialized products. Our clients require a high level of specificity in commerce. And our cannabis dispensaries, they hold very specific products with variety. And the 600 buffer rule is requiring our patrons to walk an additional 600 feet. Some are not able-bodied to find their specific product.
You have 30 seconds.
You have 30 more
You have
seconds.
30 more seconds. Yep.
Lastly, I just want to thank the Oversight Cannabis Committee. I hope that we can continue to work together. I advocate for an Oversight Committee, and I thank you all for your time. Let's keep this going. Let's be better.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comment. Sir, if you would like to step up to the microphone, feel free to begin your public comments. State your name and record if you like. I'll begin this timer. If you have 30 seconds remaining, I'll ring this bell and the table as such.
Hakeem, Golden Gate Cannabis Company. I just wanted to reiterate here, I really hope that you as a committee towards a more inclusive reading of the governor's signing of the cafe bill, as we're calling it. I really think the ability for current operators to be able to sell off-sale general products, chips, soda, water, stuff like that, will help tremendously with everybody, not just people that would have to, from what I would understand, probably get another permit for a restaurant, because you'd be serving, live products. The ability to do prepackaged goods, in addition to cannabis, is a lifeline to a lot of us right now. And if you guys disagree with, if it doesn't go through, I think the city and the state is leaving multi-millions sales tax and state revenue on the table.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comments. Now checking our online portal to see if we have any comments there. Sorry, we do have one comment. I'll read it aloud for the record. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say I hope the commission is extended, as there is still much work to do in the coming years to address some of the failures of the equity program. Fortunately, from my perspective, our equity program has become more of a landlord entitlement program. It is my sincere hope that we can begin tying equity CUs to the operator and not the location. This is the program's major fault and will prevent anyone in the program from establishing generational wealth. Thank you. And I see no other comments online.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor to approve the regular agenda. Can we get a vote, please?
Yes, we can. Chairperson Elijah Malan, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 10 is currently unfilled. Seat 11, Apollo Loss is currently absent. Seat 12, Barry Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nogales Valley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Jay Gilmore, how do you vote? Aye. Seat 15 is currently unfilled. Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote? Sorry, Antoinette, I don't know if you heard that. Seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote on accepting the agenda as it stands?
Aye.
Thank you very much. With 6 ayes and no nays, the motion passes to accept the agenda as it is.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 5, approving the minutes of our last meeting. I looked over them briefly. I move to approve as is.
Second.
Thank
Motion
you.
is seconded.
Can we open up for public comment?
Yes, we may. For members of the public who are attending remotely, the public comment instructions are now up on the screen. For anyone here attending in person who would like to make a public comment again specifically about the minutes from the last meeting, you can feel free to stand in this corner and take you up one at a time to make your public comment. I give a few seconds for folks online to write down. Chairperson, I do not see any hands raised and I do not see any public comment in person or online.
Thank you. Can we get a vote on the motion?
Yes, we may. And a vote to approve the minutes from our 10/9/2024 meeting as it stands. Chairperson Melanie Jamalian, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 10 is currently unfilled. Seat 11, Apollo Wallace is unable to attend today. Seat 12, Kari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nogales-Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 15 is currently unfilled. And seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you very much. With 6 ayes and 0 nays, we have approved the minutes from the last meeting.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, Office of Cannabis update. The office will provide us with a brief and general update as they will provide us more detailed updates further along the meeting. Floor is yours, Nikesh. Thank you.
Yes.
Right.
Scott, sorry.
Sure thing. I will lead us in here and Nikesh will also be participating as we move along. For the Office of Cannabis update, this meeting, we will start off with in the permitting world. We currently have issued 72 permitting permits, which is 6 more than our last meeting, which was about a month ago. So about 6 permits issued in the last month. All the applications in our system that can be picked up for processing, in other words, are not buffered out or are not waiting in a queue behind another application already. All of those have been picked up and are already processing. We are continuing to process MCDs and temporary permits to enter the final stage in the process. The vast majority of these applications have gotten to those final stages, but we continue to urge anyone who has an active application with our office to respond to the OOC's request for more information immediately so that we can move on those before the end of the year. If you have an active application and you have not heard from the Office of Cannabis in some time, please email us. It probably means your contact information is out of date. So you can always email us at officeofcannabis@sfgov.org to get the ball rolling on that.
That's not, if I could just reiterate. we
Yes,
just
sir.
said, If you haven't heard from us, it is likely because your contact information is out of date. We have been in steady communication with everyone in our pipeline, especially the types of the MCDs. We recognize that this deadline is hard and steadfast, and that's why we initiated the communications over a year and a half ago to make sure that the MCDs have had enough runway to clear the final version. So it's really important that what Scott is saying is taken hard. This is more for everyone to pay attention, not necessarily here, but we'll watch this at a later point. If you haven't heard from us and you are an MCD or time, please do reach out immediately. That should not be the case. We've been in communication with all of those applicants from the approval. And to Scott's point at the outset, the 72 permits that we've issued, they also include those that we've transitioned from a temporary or provisional status to a permanent status. So we've seen a lot of movement there. We'll keep pushing until the end of the year. And we've created mechanisms to expedite this review for the folks that are going to be impacted. So if you are in this pool and you have not heard from us, reach out ASAP. But it may be too late. So the urgency is there.
Yes, sir. I do believe the hope is that no one has to experience a disruption to their ability to do cannabis business. That's what we would like to avoid. In the permitting world, we also have administered a shot clock. Specifically, we've talked in the past about how we administered a shot clock on medical applications, on temporary applications. This round of shot clocks was specifically for verified equity applicants, and specifically working with those that have either been lagging behind or not been moving at all. This shot clock will expire in the middle of December, on December 16th. So again, this is another call for if you have an active application with our office and you are an equity applicant, please make sure you're looking at your inboxes. You're checking all of your emails, not just one you usually use, because you got to check which one you might have listed with our office to make sure you look for those shot clock communications. Just as a little bit of more info for folks, the criteria for shot clocks was essentially older applications, so applications submitted between 2018 and 2021 that had either stalled or been unresponsive for, a significant period of time. These were the applications specifically that were shot clocking. This will help us clear out a queue and, continue to put our processing efforts towards those apps that are legitimately moving forward. Every applicant is able to, terminate the shot clock, so to speak, and continue their application moving forward, provided that they're responsive to us and they're able to provide certain documents like proof to occupy. So it's a very straightforward process. We're again just calling verified equity applicants. If you have an application with us, please check your emails because you may have an outstanding email from us.
Scott, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The purpose of the shot clock is not to be punitive. It is exactly what Scott mentioned. It's to better understand our own queue of applications, so we know the applications that are viable, that are willing to move forward, and then those that for one reason or another are no longer viable, have no longer an interest in moving forward, maybe blocking somebody else from moving forward because they're still in the queue, but have no real desire to advance. So that's what the purpose of this is for. It's not to target, it's not to penalize, it is to really get a better sense of who in our own queue is actually willing and able to move forward in the process versus those that are not. And that's why we started with those that submitted applications for 2018 to 2021. These are older applications. At this point, it's 6 years. And most of these folks we have not heard from for quite some time. So it's more of a cleanup effort than it is to penalize people. That's not the spirit.
And during the first two shot clock rounds, did you see some inactive applications clearing the way for someone who was buffered out behind them? Is that, I would assume that that would happen quite frequently.
I feel like it has happened,
I mean, I think in general, what we've seen is that there are applicants that were no longer interested in moving forward.
Right.
And they take this as an opportunity to withdraw their applications. In some instances, that does clear the way for someone that's been on hold behind them. This particular round of shot clock administration will be a little bit more telling because the net has been cast a little bit wider.
Right.
So yes, the short answer is yes, and we expect that more or less will follow from this round, probably.
So if they don't respond to you by mid-December, are those then considered abandoned? Is that how it's gonna be handled?
Scott, before you answer that, it's
well,
fact specific,
yes,
but-
with an asterisk.
Yeah, exactly. The short of it is that, yes, except it'll depend on the specific circumstances. If that applicant is completely non-responsive for the clear the next shot clock, then that's a very different story than if someone is responsive and having trouble providing us with.
Sure, okay. So it's case to case.
Yes.
Okay,
But,
thank you.
but the short of it is, if someone withdraws, and we make this very clear in communication, if someone withdraws, then their application is not considered abandoned, it's just removed from the queue, they still have their status as an equity applicant. If someone does not respond and we are forced to deem their application abandoned, then they also lose their status to be able to get that priority review that comes with the verified equity.
Understood.
To make that very clear, and that's why we want to hear from folks,
Sure.
one way or the other.
Two questions. One, on the point of making sure we're reaching these people that we don't know if we've got their right information. Have we thought about alternative channels other than just kind of us, which is kind of us talking to each other a lot of the time? First question. Second question is, what kind of record keeping are we doing around applications that get abandoned or don't meet the shot clock? Are we keeping any sort of information in the office? I'm not to say that you would share that with us. I'm not asking for that, but I just want to make sure that that kind of information is accreting to the knowledge of the office.
I can take that one. Or you want to-
Yeah, go for it.
So second question first, yes, we're record keeping, we're archiving these applications. There's a paper trail.
And with the previous rounds of shot clock, and I imagine we'll institute a very similar policy moving forward. This shot clock is, we do multiple rounds of email outreach. As the shot clock continues ticking down, we do multiple rounds of phone outreach. At the end of the
It's a
day,
very heavy lift.
yeah,
And it's actually a standardized process. Every time we've administered the shot clock, it has been the same process. Maybe what we've asked for is different depending on the specific rules, but the process, there's a reminder, that there's another reminder.
Yeah.
There's plenty of communication that goes in.
and ultimately, the most we can do, right, is use the information that has been provided to us by the applicants to try to reach them. This is a nice plug too, as a reminder for all applicants, that it is the applicant's responsibility to make sure that our office is up to date with the most up-to-date information about their application, whether that is contact information or changes in ownership or things of that nature, right? The onus does fall on the applicant. That said, as Director Patel outlined, we are trying as much of a Herculean lift as we can to reach out to these people.
Well, and the other sort of added benefits of our process is, it's not just the applicant that's contacted, it is any of the other partners that are also
Yeah.
included on the
If
application.
there's consultants that they've listed as being allowed to edit their app, if there's other owners, everybody gets contacted with the shot clock, so, yeah. Moving forward, in the grants world, we just wrapped up the most recent round of grants. I'm sure the committee remembers, we also just voted on how the next iteration of grants is going to be distributed next year. The grants team is currently working in tandem on both those projects. There's stuff to do for the lead-in for that grant that's coming next year, forms they need to submit and various hurdles they need to clear. And then in terms of the grant that just finished, they're working on tabulating the exact totals on all the spend downs and also on distributing their annual grant survey. It goes out to the grant recipients and asks a series of questions that range from questions about their satisfaction with the program and the Office of Effectiveness, as well as demographic information, so that we can use that to inform our efforts moving forward.
And one thing that is worth noting is that the utilization rate, it's an internal goal, but it means more to us than probably the community. High utilization rates typically instill confidence in the grantor. We have some of the highest utilization rates in the state, and this last round was an exception, near 100% utilization rate. And in part, that's a reflection of the recommendations that, right? That's why it's such a very tricky task that the committee has before it, but we value the input we get because it helps inform how successful the programs will be and how we know what actually would be able to get out to the people that can spend it out.
Yeah, just to be totally clear for all the listeners, utilization rate is our ability to use the whole grant award. And typically we're above 95, 96% in terms of using every dollar that we get access to.
Real quick question. SB 1109, just signed by the governor, provides for voluntary disclosure of demographic data for individual licensees on application and renewal. My question is, and this is Senator Bradford, just leading light on social equity across the state. My question is the office going to get the benefit of that, and can we use it somehow?
Am I understanding correctly that the bill is authorizing offices to gather voluntarily given demographic information?
It's the DCC, right? So via however you plug into the DCC, I guess. I don't know.
I think I'll sort of extrapolate the underlying notion of the question, which is what is the office doing to better assess where these dollars in the grant context are going and whether they're impacting the communities that we need to respond by bad drug losses? The answer is yes. What we're doing and have been doing is in these surveys that Scott just mentioned, there are sections of demographic information. It is voluntary and most of our respondents do fill it in. So we are able to track who the dollars are going to, what their demographics are, to the extent that they can matter, right? So there's obviously concerns around, or not concerns, but the integrity of that data depends on the person who's going to get in, how much information they have about racial demographics, for instance, of them. And
If I remember correctly, this was the one that we looked at as a committee, and where there was race and ethnicity information, gender information, pay scale information. I don't know if you remember that, breaking down the different levels of who works in what role.
Yep.
Yeah.
We captured on multiple points. There's that survey that Scott mentioned. There's a survey that we conduct after grants that's more tailored and specific to grant recipients. But there are several different points where we try and gather that information. Of course, it's voluntary.
I certainly think if the DCC wants to work with us and share that data, I mean, we'd be happy to receive it so we can talk
Yeah,
to them about it.
it might be an additional tool about information outside of San Francisco, right? For y'all, right? It could be
Comparative purposes.
because they'll be gathering it statewide, so it could be you can use it. I don't know, just another tool in your toolbox.
This is one perhaps.
I think it'll be interesting to see how they roll it out and
Yeah.
how they make that information publicly accessible. I know that the TCC has been doing a lot of work to publish data, especially as it relates to their equity programs. They have an entire section on the website that's dedicated to it, the dashboards. We're happy to circulate that information, but I know that as of the last month and a half, a lot of that information has started going live. So I imagine, the new information that can be going to collect might even make its way on the public.
Yeah. And speaking of the DCC, on a state level, we have been, or for information coming from a state level, we do continue to distribute information that is given to us by the Department of Cannabis Control through our online listserv. This information specifically pertains to recalls, for product recalls, voluntary and mandatory, as well as for any new legislation or regulations that the DCC might be proposing. So please keep your eyes peeled for those communications, particularly if you're an operator. Operators can face fines or penalties for failure to comply with state recalls. If you would like to receive these notices and you're not receiving them, again, please contact us at officeofcannabis@sfgov.org, and we're happy to get you signed up for the listserv so that you can get those notices. We send them out pretty much every single week, maybe every once in a while. It doesn't go out, but
Almost every.
almost every. And with that, I'll pass it over to our fearless leader here to talk about enforcement.
So, thanks, Scott. So on the enforcement end, there's obviously a limitation how much we can share because some of the processes and procedures are sensitive for very good reason. But I'm happy to provide an overview of what we've been doing at a recent in the office, the city really gosh. So many of you may be aware that the office can receive complaints through a variety of different ways. It's either we get a tip that comes in directly over the phone. Most people submit their complaints to 311. They take all shapes and forms. Some are as simple as, I smell cannabis on this block. We'll go out and check it out. In other instances, if someone has more actionable information, we'll follow up on it. It's a gradual approach that we take. So if the first layer here is a complaint comes in, we'll go do an investigation. And if we can close it out, we will close it out. If it appears that there's an odor of cannabis, for instance, and it's strong, it's emanating from a certain area that's behind one of those doors, then we graduate our approach. We go to our city partners and say, hey, we think that this may be going on. Is there a way for us to gain influence? If there is a way to do that at the local level, then we'll take those steps. If there isn't a way to do that, then we reach out to our DCC partner, and that's where we sort of align ourselves. Are you doing this? What is it that you know about this particular business or location? And to the extent that there's overlap or a willingness to take further steps, that'll happen. You've heard me talk a number of times about the different enforcement actions that have resulted from the partnership between our office and the DCC. It often results in hundreds of pounds of flour being confiscated, people being detained, and documents being seized that then help get more of a sense of how widespread is this? Is this a single operation, more widespread operation? That was as high as we had gotten, and it was proven to be quite impactful. More recently, though, we implemented an internal policy through our own resources in the city, as well as with the DCC, to create this sort of reporting mechanism for cases that might be fit for prosecution. And this is civil prosecution. So recently, with the partnership with the city attorney's office, the city attorney, David Chu, filed a civil lawsuit against a property owner in San Francisco that was connected to unregulated cannabis cultivation businesses. That lawsuit was filed just a week and a half ago, and our office was involved in the initial steps, and it is now going to take its way, it's going to make its way through the courts. That's a relatively recent partnership. It's one that's already bearing fruit, and one that we suspect will continue to get traction over the next coming year. So that's a pretty big update. I think a lot of it is due to the relationships that we've formed with the DCC as a really strong investigative and enforcement arm. But then I also think there's a lot of credit that goes to the city attorney's office, the head of their code enforcement, and specifically the city attorney, David Chu, for taking this upon himself as a priority. We've been in conversation for probably 9 to 12 months about making this a priority, and there's been some real follow through, and this is just the latest in that. We can't talk about a lot of it, but this is very public. There's a press release, we've got a little bit of media coverage, and the idea is very much to send the message that if you are supporting these unregulated businesses, it's not just a small fine that's going to be at the end of this process, and you can pack up and relocate, just peg it off as a cost of doing business. There are going to be some serious fines that could cripple your ability to continue being in any sort of landlord and ownership space. So we'll see where it goes, but definitely a positive step.
Yeah, who wants to be sued by the city and county of San Francisco? Yeah, nobody. Nikesh, that's awesome. It really is a huge update. Is there anything that we can do to help get that message out that you want? And this is such big news, and maybe as big as Matt Gaetz getting nominated for Attorney General, but
I think the most powerful tool at this point is to spread this, right? And say, look, there has been an innovation from the working tools that are available in the city, specifically here. And if you are, I almost want to on it.
yeah,
No, I think the best thing you can do is spread the word. And raise awareness about the city is doing something about this. There was a civil lawsuit you can follow it. And it's not something that's just going to sort of slip through the cracks. The city attorney is committed to this. And we actually have a pretty good reporting mechanism in place to gather information. And there's a pretty clear channel of how information is being gathered and how it's being elevated. So it's, I think, just spread the word. Let people know that this is actually happening. Because that's the biggest way to undercut it from happening in the first place, because if people don't feel like we can just get away.
I have a question. Hi there. So let me see. You guys were, I think you had just mentioned about with the survey from equity users, at the end of a grant year. And I believe you said they're not mandatory, but you're hoping, or are they mandatory? I guess that's my question. Are these Go ahead, dear.
All right.
I think she's
Okay.
ultimately under 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, so good question. They are not mandatory in the sense that grantees have to fill them out. They're highly encouraged. We have a high responsive rate. What is even less mandatory is providing your demographic information. So what we see is that there's generally a high level of responsiveness to the survey. And then where it's a little bit harder to tell how responsive people are is in terms of the data they're providing about themselves and how complete it is. Right? Sometimes someone might feel comfortable providing their gender information, but not their racial information, right?
Right.
But the short answer is no, no one is compelled or it's not mandated to fill out these surveys, but it is highly encouraged and we've historically had very high response rates.
Thanks. Here's my second question. Given that, so since the survey isn't required, how are you guys able to determine how well this equity program is working for the equity recipient?
That's a good question.
And let me add this before you answer. I work with a lot of grantors, okay? And what I see is that at the end of a grant year, just for example, if it's a 2-year grant, at each end of each year, we have to fill out grant reports as well as a survey. So I'm wondering, how are you guys capturing the feedback in terms of how well or not well this program is working for our current recipients, equity recipients? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'll constrain your question in the context of grant recipients, right? So all of our grant recipients to begin with are equity applicants. It's just not the case that all of our equity applicants are grants, right? So when we talk about grants, we're talking about equity applicants and applicants. In terms of how well it's working, there are a couple tools we have. The survey is one, right? The survey asks questions about how effective was the process? How easy was it to get the dollars? How satisfied were you with it? What general feedback do you have? And those are all tools that we use to inform the next iteration. One concrete example of that is in some of these surveys, we've received feedback about how the expense categories are too narrow and how they should be expanded. From that, we've gone back to the grantor and said, hey, we're hearing from our equity applicants and operators that they would like the grant funding to extend to purchasing property, for instance, right? So that's one of the ways that we've been able to act on some of the feedback that we get. Another tool that we use to determine how effectively these dollars are being spent is the integrity of the documents we're collecting and being able to account for the dollars that people say they are spending, right? The baseline way of administering a grant program and seeing it's being effective is, are you receiving dollars? Are you getting them out? And are you able to track where those dollars went? And does it withstand the scrutiny of an audit? And it has so far. So we're really proud of that work as well. The other piece that we look at is the particular grant applicants or operator. Where are they in our process and how have they advanced over time, especially time that overlaps with the administration of the grant program? And we've seen applicants turn into operators. We've seen operators stay in business for the length of the time that they've had grant funding. So that's another way that we're sort of looking at the knowledge and saying, is it working? When we see movement within our queue for grant recipients, that is, it's certainly not to say that it's causation, that this is driving this, but you can see that it's a part of that overall story of why they may be advancing through the process. And the same for operators. We've heard sort of anecdotally from operators that the money that they receive through the grant program, it is sometimes what allows them to stay in business while they're enduring a tougher time in the, well, I mean, it's been a tough time in general. It's not as if there's pockets of highs and lows, but it gives you enough wiggle room and flexibility to be able to charter a really tough time. So that's kind of what we hear. Those are the three mechanisms that we really pull. The survey, like I said, it's not mandatory, but it does have a high response rate. So it sort of serves that role of giving a direct feedback loop to the office, because most people are participating. And Angela, I've stopped moving my mouth, so.
Thank you, Nikesh. No, that was
That's good.
and as a recipient, I can say that the recipients do work closely with the Office of Cannabis, so there's a lot of exchange about the financials of the health of that particular recipient. So what Nikesh is saying is pretty on point in terms of you guys do know how impactful those grants are. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's really good to hear. Thank you. Okay.
With that,
Yeah, one final update on the Cannabis Oversight Committee, actually. So, any other questions on this before I move to our final update here? Okay, so, I had actually heard a couple people mention how they would like to see the Oversight Committee continue. I think that's, very timely. So, as many of you know, today is the last meeting of this particular iteration of the committee. All of your terms expire on December 3rd of the coming month. But it's also the year in which the committee sunsets. So at the end of this calendar year, the committee sunsets. It's not just that your terms expire, but the committee expires, so to speak. We were able to work with supervisor's office to, well, we did, but the supervisor did introduce legislation about a week and a half ago to extend the Cannabis Oversight Committee that is now making its way through the Board of Supervisors. We'll see how that process unfolds, but if there is enough support, then the committee will be extended. Once the committee is extended, then the BOS will start accepting applications for different seats. And then once there's a critical mass of applications received, they'll schedule opportunities for people to come in, present their case, then nominations will follow, appointments will be made, and then a committee will ultimately be handled, much like the process that all of you went through. So good news is that that process has already started. And we are indebted to Supervisor Benjamin's office for taking that mandate, right? What we'll see is how it unfolds. As many of you know, it's election season, so the composition of the Board of Supervisors is different, and we'll sort of see how that goes itself out in the next months. What I feel confident in saying is that the process has started. It's very, very, very unlikely that the decision is made on this particular item before the end of the year. So at the earliest, probably sometime early next year, we'll know whether the committee has been extended. And then that'll be the point at which the Board of Supervisors can start accepting applications. We will send out notifications for when that window opens, if it opens, and it'll be through our industry updates. But I just wanted to flag that for everyone here because it's good news, right? Now, before we sort of conclude here and move on to the next part of our agenda, I just want to take this as an opportunity to say thank you to all of you, because we recognize that it is a time commitment. You do need to come down here. You do need to engage with the materials. You do need to have conversations with our office and other city departments. Some of you that are in positions of leadership, you sit in on the scheduling meetings. This is not a light lift. There's no compensation, and we really do appreciate the time and the insight and really the expertise that you bring. And that brings me to my next point, that I think it's rare to have opportunities where you have stakeholders, community members, and city representatives and the office that your work really informs all come together in one place and have an opportunity to converse in a very public and transparent way. That is where I think the real magic and value of this committee comes from. We may not always agree. There may be disconnects between the decisions that are made between the committee and what the public wants or what the office is ultimately doing. But we have space for that. And a large part of that is going to all of you being here, showing up, making sure we have a forum, inviting people that you know that have important perspectives, identifying important issues for us to talk about, and giving all of that the airspace that it deserves. So I just really do want to say thank you. Scott's going to speak very briefly in a moment about some of the things that this committee has been able to do over the last year. But I don't think that it can be overstated how important it is for you all to be here and to create this space and have a public forum that is also hybrid, right? People can participate without necessarily having to physically be here. And that's not the norm. That's not how most committees in the city work. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and I can't reiterate it enough either. When I started with the office, I worked with the last iteration of the Cannabis Oversight Committee. Some familiar faces on the committee now, but mostly a new committee here. And last time I was sort of stepping in about halfway through that session. So this has been the first like full cycle of the committee that I've worked with. And it has been a privilege to work with all of you. You all have been very good about attending and participating. I've not had to bug you about a bunch of things. And I also recognize that it's very hard going meeting to meeting. Sometimes there's 2 months in between, 3 months in between meetings. And everything is kind of at this 50,000-foot level, and it can feel like maybe we spin our wheels here a lot, or maybe things get sort of lost in the discourse. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of quick things. This committee, if you remember way back when, towards the beginning, we oversaw the administration of our annual cannabis report, which we were just talking about some of the data that come from that report, right? That informs you to make recommendations, but it also informs our office to make sure that we are following our principles and that our programs are being effective. You also established recommendations for 2 different grant iterations, this previous grant iteration that we just did, and this next grant iteration that we'll be doing in the coming year. And that cumulatively accounts for about little more than $3.5 million in assistance to equity applicants. So just shy of $4 million that this committee has overseen the distribution of. This committee also made 6 different recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, including, for topics concerning parcel delivery service ordinance changes that would have affected cannabis businesses, moratorium-related recommendations. We made a recommendation about establishing a public bank and expanding the medical card program that DPH administers. And so, this committee has a lot of recommendation power, but not a lot of official legislative power. But I want to highlight the fact that over the course of the last year, we've been able to put together 6 of those recommendations to send to the Board of Supervisors. And then I'll just reiterate something that Director Patel was just saying for next steps. Right, keep your eyes peeled. Unlikely we'll see movement on the legislation before February, March, April of next year, depending on when the new board gets seated and how the legislative calendar lays out. But all of that said, please look out for applications for the next session of the Cannabis Oversight Committee. You've all been wonderful members. We would love to see your names going into the running for the next session and to see you back here at the table again, talking with us in the spring about important cannabis issues. So with that really wraps our update. Usually we would talk about some legislation here, but we are going to do legislation and some presentations. So again, we'll express our thanks and we'll close out the update from the office.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you for the update. We'll open for public comment before we move on to the fire department's presentation.
Yes, sir. For our remote participants, the public comment instructions are on your screen now. I'll give you a few moments to initiate that process. If you would like to provide a public comment, if you're here in person, you'd like to provide a public comment, feel free to hop on up over here by the table. We'll send you up to the podium and you'll have 3 minutes to provide your public comment. I'm just going to provide the folks online another 20 seconds or so to start raising their hands or indicating that they would like to make a comment in the chat box.
Sorry, that was a bit of a lot, like to make a public comment
Regarding the updates we just provided. Yeah. Go ahead and check on our friends. I do not see any hands raised and I do not see any comments in the chat, Chairperson.
With that, we conclude agenda item number 6 and moving on to agenda item number 7, the committee discussion about the fire department requirements for cannabis operators. The fire department will provide a little bit of guidance and clarification on the SFFD's annual permit requirements for cultivation and extraction facilities. This is a new type of permit that we didn't know about before, so therefore Captain Sai is kind enough to come in today and give us a little guidance on the type of permit, what it requires, what operators should be prepared for when this inspection and when they file for this application. And really just letting the industry know that you do need to file for this because a lot of us just didn't know about it. So thank you, Captain Sy, for being here. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Captain Sy with the San Francisco Fire Department. I've worked with a few of you, and for those of you who are unaware, I'll hopefully go by this quickly and answer any of your questions. The first thing I would advise any operator to do is talk to planning before you come to us. Talk to planning first, get the approval, and then move on to DBI, Department of Building Inspection. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's important. Rather than you coming to fire first, a lot of operators will come to fire, planning, DBI all at the same time. The problem with that is when you file an application fee with the fire department, there is no refunds. And currently the application fee is at $424. So I don't want you to waste any of your money. And that's why I think the best thing to do is go to planning first, find out if they will approve your location, and then talk to an architect or design professional to draw up plans to submit to DBI, Department of Building Inspection. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. It depends on your operation. The fire department only permits your operation if you're involved with cultivation and or extraction. So if you're retail, distribution, delivery, anything like that, what you really need to do is talk to Department of Building Inspection to determine whether an F1, and that's F1 is in F Frank, the number 1, would be required. Under certain circumstances, depending on how much of the square footage of your building is using, here, I'll read you the definition of an F1. In the California Building Code, the F1 is defined as a factory industrial group, F occupancy, including, among other things, the use of a building or structure or portion thereof for the following: assembling, disassembling, fabricating, finishing, manufacturing, packaging, repair, or processing operations. So in other words, if you have a retail business, a delivery, anything other than cultivation or extraction, pay close attention to that what I'm saying. You would need to go to DBI with your design professional and kind of go over the amount of square footage your operation uses for any of the things I just listed. And depending on the square footage you're using will determine whether an F1 occupancy is required. All right, so there's a determination there. So if you're using under the square footage, you don't need it. And if you are over it, you will need it. Now, the fire department does not follow that because we don't permit it. It's just something that you'll have to work with planning and DBI. Okay, so we don't have anything to do with that. But if your business has anything to do with the Office of Cannabis, the fire department does have to do an inspection to verify that you are not doing anything that requires a permit, like cultivating or extracting. So even though you don't have any permits from us, you still need to set up an inspection so that we can log in the address and record that there is nothing there that we would need to permit. And again, that doesn't mean to say the F1 is not required. Just because we don't permit it doesn't mean you don't need it. That's something you'll have to talk to DBI with. Now, where we get involved is if your operation has to do with cultivation or extraction. Okay, so let's talk about cultivation first. If you go onto this San Francisco Fire Department website, and the address is sf-fire.org. That's our main website. And if you search, what you're going to be looking for is what we call administrative bulletins. These will give you the information you need to apply for permits in regards to cultivation or extraction. So like I said, we're going to talk about cultivation first. So if your business has anything to do with cannabis or plant cultivation, pay attention to Administrative Bulletin 2.17 or AB 2.17. That's going to give you the guidelines of what you're going to need to do, how to submit, what the requirements are. You'll have to fill out an application. As I said, that's a non-refundable fee of $424. And in that application, you would just tell us, okay, what are you applying for? In this conversation, we're talking about cannabis cultivation. So you would apply, pay, and then you would show us how you are currently in F1. So if you are cultivating and or extracting, you have to be in F1. That doesn't matter about your square footage, like I said earlier. The building has to be an F1 occupancy. It has to be listed that way with DBI. So you'll have to show me, or you'll have to show the fire department a certificate of final completion or a certificate of compliance, anything like that. It's a certificate that shows the current occupancy code for the building. So you need to have an F1. And again, that's why I always advise everyone to go to DBI first, because that F1 process is very extensive. As I said, you'll need an architect or design professional. So I really strongly advise people do that first, because if you come to us and apply, the permits are only good for 6 months. And then if you haven't finished, you're supposed to reapply, and then you have to pay another application fee. So rather than waste that time, it's best if you go to planning, get approved for the location, go to DBI, get the F1, and every other requirement that's necessary, and then come to us, so that by the time you come to us, you have everything. There's less of a chance for you losing that application fee. So in this scenario, if you're cultivating, you go to planning, you go to DBI, finish out whatever requirements that DBI requires for you to get the F1, and then show us your certificate of final completion that proves you are an F1. Then we can go ahead and get you guys permitted. Now, if you're extracting, same thing, you have to have an F1, and that doesn't matter about the square footage or anything. It's if your operation involves extraction, then you need the F1. The other thing is CO2. If you guys are using CO2 for your cultivation, that will need a DBI permit. So even if the building, and we've come across this in a few locations, even if the building has a CO2 system installed by a professional, if there is nothing from DBI that approves that installation, it's as good as it's useless. So if you're using CO2 for your cultivation, that's a separate DBI permit you have to get. And if there's any kind of hang up or delay or problem, and you applied with fire, again, you're going to lose that application fee. So I strongly advise against that. And the way the program is designed now, you from my understanding, the Office of Cannabis is not allowing operators to just come in and grow and then catch up later. You have to have all of this before you can start your operation, the F1 and the permits from DBI. Now, extraction, same thing. Planning, DBI, get the F1, and then come to us for your permit application. Now, for CO2 use, that you're going to have to submit plans again with your design professional, the DBI, get them approved, get everything signed off. The only difference with CO2 use that we require for operators is the installation of lights and sirens for the inside of the rooms. Typically, we need some kind of visual and audio warning device on the outside to warn people not to come in. But because your operation frequently has maybe people inside the rooms cutting, the lights are very bright in those rooms, so they wear sunglasses. It's kind of tedious work. A lot of times the workers will wear ear pods, and the technology these days in those things are incredible. You can't hear anything. So if there was a CO2 leak or there was too much CO2 in the room, there's a chance that they won't hear the siren or strobe on the outside of the room with the door closed. So we require it to be on the inside and outside. So both to keep people out in case of a leak, and anyone in the room has to get out. But that's all stuff that has to be, put down on your plans when you submit to DBI to get approval before you build. And then when you're built, you get that your card finalized. So These are the basic requirements. The administrative bulletin for extraction is 2.18. So if you go to our fire department website, 2.17 will be for cultivation and 2.18 is for extraction. And those will give you the kind of general guidelines on what you need to do, what you need to have. But the F1 is very important. We cannot permit you unless the building has an occupancy code of an F as in Frank 1, the number 1. And then, like I said, again, if you have CO2, that needs to be permitted both from DBI and from fire. And any other permits that are open with DBI that involve or even touch the business have to be closed. And when I say closed, they have to either be finalized, they have to be withdrawn, they have to be expired, whatever the case may be. They can't just be left open. Any job card, any DBI permit that's open that affects the business, that touches the business, has to be resolved before fire can issue a permit. So long story short, go to planning, go to DBI, get your F1, get your CO2 permit if you need it, come to fire, and then, apply for the permit. We can set up inspection and then kind of go from there. Anybody have any
Thanks.
questions?
Yeah, thanks, Captain Sai, but our question is really about the inspection that you said you could call, set it up, and we'll go from there. That's the inspection that, I'm looking at the codes. Obviously, not all extraction falls under this permit. Reading the code, it seems like 90% of extractions that happen in San Francisco are ice water based. We have very few people that are actually extracting type 7. So most extraction facilities in San Francisco do not fall under this code. So let's be clear on that. Like mine, we're doing trichome separation with ice water. So there's no compressed gases, there's no volatiles, there's no reason for an extraction facility that makes ice water hash to apply for this. So just for the operators that are listening, if you're making hash, you do not need to apply for this particular annual permit. While Captain Sai is correct that you still need to be in compliance with DBI and planning and building type, use type, you do not need the annual permit if you're doing ice water based extractions or dry sieving and doing keefing or whatever. And then you mentioned the CO2 versus non-CO2. So when you guys schedule an inspection, and this is mostly affecting operators that have already gotten their certificate of occupancy, that went through the planning and through DBI, that need to do the annual permit, the fire operation permit. Is that what it's called? Is that correct, Captain Sai?
Well, first off, let me correct you on the first part. So 2.18 is for guidelines for cannabis and plant extraction facilities. So the cold water separation isn't really, unless there's been some update that I'm unaware of, which is very possible. We require, even if it's cold water, it's the process that's permitted. We want to be able to go there each year. So when you have an operational permit, we do an annual inspection that goes along with that. And so we need to make sure that the extraction process has not changed over the year, that you're still doing cold water. It's not so much that you're using cold water, that there's nothing, obviously hazard about that. It's just, it's the operation itself. And that's why I would stress people take a look at 2.18, and that is the guidelines for submitting for cannabis and plant extraction facilities.
I'm getting conflicting information from your marshal who actually visited our facility and said we were not subject to it. So maybe this is something that you guys should discuss internally first. I've had one of your marshals on site for an inspection about exactly this less than 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. So
Okay.
maybe you should look into that. And that's why we wanted this. That's why we need this conversation, because there's obviously a lot of confusion around this, as just, evidently in our conversation. And we have that in writing too. There's a paper trail about this extraction method and it being exempt. So again, let's assume that the operator has all their certificates, they're F1, they're compliant, but they need the annual operating permit. Let's talk about cultivators in this case. How long does it take you guys to process? Is there an inspection checklist? To your point earlier, there was some helpful information in there that if somebody is running CO2, they need to have this visual alarm system. Is that all codified? Is that something that an operator could just extract out of the code?
That's all, when the operator reviews their plans with DBI, that's all addressed there.
Again, this is for operators who already went through this process and are operating. And when DBI did not, I believe this bulletin is from 2022, correct?
The current one is, the administrative bulletin is 2022.
Right, so the ones that were operating previously to that, that went through plan checks, that got their certificates of occupancy, that are F1 and have an operating permit, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't have been subject to that because the code came out in 2022.
I'm
And
sorry,
we've had-
wait, I'm sorry to interrupt. What code what code specifically are you saying that they would not be applied to?
The one that you just referred to that would outline the visual emergency aids that you just referred to.
So the CO, okay, so cannabis in this city started getting licensed. Well, we started getting involved in about 2016 or 2017. And so when the requirements were required, when we were permitting operators, the requirements have been the same even back then to 2022. So if they were using CO2, they always needed plans from DBI. Anytime you install anything in this city that involves, going through a wall or a plumbing system or anything like that requires a DBI permit. So that's always been standard. Now, as far as the requirement for the strobes and sirens inside the cultivation rooms, that's also been expressly, required since we've been permitting operators using CO2. So even though this is a 2022 bulletin,
2022, sorry. No, I understand. I understand what you're saying, but I'm also referring to operators that do not use CO2, that were never subject to CO2. And you guys did start inspecting, I think, the CO2 inspections. When was the first time that somebody was passed? Was it this year? Or last year? Where we had the first compliant CO2 setup, right? That was this year, correct? So
yeah,
I understand what you're getting at, but I guess maybe you're misunderstanding my question is that this fire operational permit, this annual one, a lot of us didn't know about it. And now I'm just saying that those people that already have gone through planning, like myself, who are operational, who are currently applying for this, is there any guideline that we don't need to go back to DBI? There's no reason for us to go back to planning. There's no reason to go back to DBI. We're not making any changes to any buildings, and there's a lot of people in that boat. So my question is, for those, is there a guideline for your inspection and what you want to see every year when you come in?
Are you asking for what we are looking for in situations where there is CO2 or no CO2?
Let's start with no CO2 to avoid confusion.
So we would go in, we look at the basic life safety system. So if you have a fire alarm, if you have sprinklers, these things all need to be currently certified. Your exit lighting needs to be illuminated. You need to have emergency lighting. Your egress paths need to be clear, nothing blocking anyone that needs to escape or exit. Your exit doors need to be clear. Doors need to be able to swing open without any obstruction on the other side. Then we go to the rooms. You need to have currently certified California State Fire Marshal tagged, fully charged extinguishers for each of the rooms. And if you have CO2, then that expands to the system. So one, we're going to see, do you have a DBI permit for it? And then you'd apply for an operational permit with fire. And then we would, if you got it verified from DBI, then there isn't so much that we need to look at for your installation. It's just, do you have the sensors? Do you have the monitors? Do you have the sirens and strobes inside and out? Do you have signage identifying what type of gas? Do you have signage identifying the use of the gas? Do you have signage telling people if they see the siren to leave the building, call 911? And do do you have those kind of warning signs up? These are the things we're looking for.
Okay, so it's really a fire safety and hazardous material inspection. That's really what it kind of boils down to.
Yeah, we're not going over all the hazardous materials, but if you have a certain amount of flammable liquids or solids, then you're going to have to apply for a permit for a storage, locker or something.
Right, which most of us cultivators have gone through that. Okay, so I think that clarifies a lot around the annual operational permit, what you're looking for. And I'm assuming that you have access to the plans that DBI approved, so you can look at the egress routes. And
No.
You don't. So
I
those
do-
have to
no.
be supplied by the operator.
No, we don't even need that from the operator because if you've gone through DBI and you've got everything signed off, there are no more open permits, then we don't need that. Like that agency has verified it. We're just doing our own walkthrough to make sure there isn't an abundant amount of storage blocking pathways, blocking doors, or piled up blocking sprinklers or those kind of things.
And if the operator already has a certificate of occupancy for their particular use and, no open tickets with DBI and let's say the occupancy loads, nothing have changed, then, if there is a violation, how are those handled? Do you guys work with the operator to resolve the violation? Does the operator have to go back to the plan check, or do we get referred to a different department? Could you just quickly give us an overview of what the procedure is that if an operator does get an NOV during one of your inspections?
Yeah, it would depend on what the NOV is. So if the notice of violation is for something that was installed without a permit, then yes, the operator or the business will have to go back to DBI. It just kind of depends on what the violation is and what corrections are needed.
Well, I meant the violations that like what you're coming in to inspect for, like the egress being blocked or too much flammable liquid being stored. Sorry if I was not clear on that.
So if the egress is blocked, the operator can do multiple things. They can move and clear it on site, and then a violation does not need to be issued. If the obstruction is so huge they need to get a forklift, then we would need to come back and verify it was gone. And then what was your other scenario?
If there was something improperly stored that would actually be a fire hazard, about something a little bit more serious, I suppose.
So it depends on the item being stored. If it's something that we need to contact Department of Public Health with, then another agency would get involved. It just depends on the type and quantity of whatever it is that we're finding that's being stored on site.
Great. Thanks, Captain. That answers most of my questions. Appreciate it.
Do we have any other questions from other members of the committee about any of the specifics that Captain Tsai raised? No. What do you want to do? Do you want to go to public comment now?
I think if Captain Tsai has anything else that he wants to present, otherwise we would open for public comment.
No, nothing really. Just want to reiterate the importance of the F1 permit with DBI. And again, stress that any operator interested in opening a business like this needs to go to planning, then DBI, and then us. By the time you come to fire, you should have everything done. You should have your F1, you should have all your DBI permits finalized, closed. Nothing should be open. If you have CO2, if that's something you guys need for your business, then that needs to have a permit finalized with DBI. And yeah, so by the time you get to us, you would have gotten the approval from planning. You would have gotten all your permits finalized from DBI signed off, and yeah, and then you come to us and apply, pay the application fee, and then schedule with our inspector for an on-site. Otherwise, I got nothing else. If anyone has any questions, I'll do the best I can to help you.
Great. Thank
Thank
you very
you,
much,
Captain.
Tsai.
Appreciate it. With that, we will open for public comment.
Yes, and just a very quick reminder that mostly to Captain Tsai, since he doesn't have to sit through a lot of these meetings, we cannot respond directly to questions from the public that are presented in public comment. So feel free to stick around, listen in, but yes, you will not be able to directly answer anyone's questions that might be raised during the public comment. So with that, I will put the public comment instructions on screen, and we will go ahead and get started. For our remote viewers, you should be able to see the public comment instructions on screen now. For anyone attending in person who would like to specifically comment about the discussion that we just had with the fire department, feel free to come over here and stand in this corner and we'll get to you in order. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, and I'll ring this bell when you have 30 seconds left. Just going to give a few seconds for anyone online to indicate that they would like to comment. Chairperson, I do not see any hands raised online. So I have no chats in the chat box, and it does not seem anyone here in person would like to comment.
Thank you. That concludes item number 7, and we'll take a 5-minute break before we come back for the bulk of it, which is the Cannabis Cafe bill.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. All right, welcome back. The OSC will now present the recently signed AB 1775, referring to cannabis cafes, which requires a lot of clarification.
There certainly
Thank you.
seems to be a lot of public discourse about this, so we're going to get this on screen.
So just stand by, we'll bring clarity.
No, no, this is a tough ground.
I feel a little bit. Okay, so I'm just gonna run through what we'll discuss. If you have any questions on the committee, feel free to ask me questions, stop me, that's okay. But what we'll briefly discuss here is AB 1775 will provide general information, then an official bill summary. I think it's actually important to read specifically what the bill is, because the name of this bill, and what it actually is, do not align all that well. And that led to this understanding of what it is. Then a note on cannabis consumption. This part is actually very important to what this bill is. And then how it changes California law, what it is not, based on the plain reading of the text, and then what its implementation might mean for San Francisco moving forward. So it's called the Cannabis Cafe Bill. You'll understand in a moment why I think that's a mislabel in some ways. But before we get there, let's just provide a little bit of background. So AB 1775 was passed by the CA legislature at the end of 2024, as all of you are aware. The bill was then signed by the governor, and then the official bill title is Cannabis Retail Preparation, Sale, and Consumption of Non-Cannabis Food and Beverage Products. We'll get to what that actually means in a second. Okay, so I'm going to read this because I think it's very important that I don't paraphrase it. This bill would authorize a local jurisdiction, if specified conditions are met, to allow for the preparation or sale of non-cannabis food or beverage products as specified by a licensed retailer or microbusiness in the area where the consumption of cannabis is allowed, and to sell tickets for live musical or other performances on the premises of a licensed retailer or microbusiness in the area where the consumption of cannabis is allowed. This bill would additionally specify that these provisions do not authorize a licensed retailer or microbusiness to prepare or sell industrial hemp or products containing industrial hemp as provided. Okay, so before we unpack that and reduce it to plain English, there's another part of the code section here that gets modified that I think is worth bringing your attention to. So these updates, AB 1775 provides updates to section 26200 of the Business and Professions Code. There is a section of this particular code that is amended that reads the following, and I'm going to read it because it helps paint the contours of what is what the meaning of consumption lounge is for this bill. Quote, a local jurisdiction may allow any of the activities provided in paragraph 1 if all of the following conditions are met. And in paragraph 1, they were outlining the food prep and the charging admission for live performance. 1, access to the area where cannabis consumption is allowed is restricted to persons 21 years of age or older, and each entrance to the area prominently posts a warning that cannabis consumption, including smoking of cannabis, is permitted inside. Inside is the key word that I want to draw your attention to here. I also want to draw your attention to restricted to persons 21 years of age. And those would be the two, those are the 2 points that I want to draw your attention to, because it starts giving a little bit of shape to what do we mean when we say consumption? Do we mean a parkway, for instance, that's outside of the retail store? No, that's not what this is saying. This is saying inside when it's talking about a consumption lounge, and it's saying that that area has to be restricted to persons 21 years of age or older. In most cases, without consumption lounges, that is observed by the security guard that's out in front of the store before people even enter. And then the second part here is that cannabis consumption is not visible from any public place in a non-age restricted area. This is also important because it helps paint the contours of what they mean by area of consumption. It is an indoor consumption area. Okay, so what this legislation tells us is that if you meet 2 criteria, then you have these additional avenues that you could pursue. And the additional avenues are either prepare and sell food and or charge admission for performances at your consumption. The 2 threshold criteria are 1, that you have a retail permit, a microbusiness permit from the state and local jurisdiction. That's 1. And then the second is that you have an authorization for the consumption lounge from the local jurisdiction. Here in San Francisco, there's a process to obtain that. It comes through the Department of Public Health. Okay, so before I proceed, anyone have any questions about just that baseline definition and the reading of what the text says? Okay, so taking that together, what we can say AB 1775 is not is the following. It does not allow restaurants to sell cannabis products. Cannabis retailers without consumption authorization to prepare or sell non-cannabis food and beverages can't do that. You need that consumption authorization. The way that the Assembly bill is written is it makes the consumption piece of the sentence. If you have the consumption authorization, then it unlocks some of these other avenues for you. If you do not have that, then those other avenues are not available to you. In the city and county of San Francisco, that means that you have to be a storefront retailer that also has authorization from the Department of Public Health for a consumption lounge. Similar, so in that vein, it also means that the sale of tickets for events outside of consumption lounges is not permitted. It has to be within the area of consumption. And then finally, cannabis retailers to sell non-cannabis food beverages without the other required city permits. That's also not possible. Okay, so what this means for the city now is that we understand what the code, we understand what the Assembly bill says. We've been in active communication across a number of different city departments, Office of Cannabis, the Entertainment Commission, Department of Public Health, and the Planning Department, and the City Attorney's Office to sort of unpack what this might look like. Those conversations are happening right now, and one of the things that we're trying to solidify internally is just what are the different process pathways that someone who's interested in pursuing this, assuming they're eligible, would have to take. If you're interested in opening a restaurant, what is the permit that you need from the Department of Public Health? If you're interested in just doing live entertainment and charging admission, what permit, if any, do you need from the Entertainment Commission? Underlying all of this, what kind of use designation do you need from the Planning Department? I won't speak to what those requirements are because we have reps from those departments, but those are the kinds of conversations we're having. And our hope here ultimately is to create a series of documents that explain what you need to do if you're interested in doing X, Y, and Z. A lot of it is going to be fact specific. I think what we've already identified in practical effect is that for most of the businesses in the city that would be or could be eligible to take advantage of AB 1775 right now, if they are interested in selling and preparing food, it's going to be costly to come into compliance because it will likely require structural change. Right? That's, at least from a preliminary view, what we think is going to be the case. There may be some businesses that are better poised to do this because they don't need as much structural change, but it will really be dependent on the business, its layout, and how both jive with the requirements for the necessary permit from the Department of Public Health for preparing and selling food. Right? The other piece in all this is that if you are a authorized consumption lounge and you do want to sell food, you do get the necessary permit from DPH, then you also need to have the appropriate use from the plan. So this is what we intend to make a little clearer, but what we know from the outset is that there may not be that many businesses that can take advantage of this immediately, especially on the food prep side, because it may be costly to come in. But on the entertainment side, that may be more accessible for folks because it would require maybe a permit from the entertainment commission, depending on the availability, and a use designation depending on the frequency that the operator wants to have events in charge of the issue. So lots of it is dependent on the specific circumstances and what the business is interested in doing, but this at least provides a little bit of an overview of how we're thinking about it and what we know will have to happen before it can actually get online. Can't start until the beginning of the new calendar year. That's when this goes into effect. But even then, I think that the prudent operator would be wise to wait a little bit until the processes are clearer before deciding to go one way or another. So I'm sure you have questions, but I hope that does provide a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, I have a question. I think we had it earlier and I was looking at the meetings from last time. What about packaged goods? Could somebody just on January 1st put up a snack selection and canned soda and start selling that in their store? Is that something that we could do?
Do that now.
What? Right, as soon as the bill was signed into effect. Okay.
No, you can do that now. People are doing it.
Okay.
So right now, what happened was about like 9 months ago, the DCC had
The non-cannabis goods
the
retail
non-cannabis, so before it was only cannabis goods, cannabis branded merchandise.
and paraphernalia, right?
But now, people can sell prepackaged products.
There's your
For
answer.
example, sodas, chips, but they're in San Francisco, it has to be non-potentially hazardous and it has to be limited to less than 25 square feet of total display.
No, that's not, that's a lot of display for a
Yes.
couple of tips, right?
So
Okay.
some people are talking about can we put in a vending machine? Sure, you can put in a vending machine if you don't want somebody to do, and your staff to deal with it. But the products that are sold in that vending machine are basically chips, candy bars,
Right.
sodas, all prepackaged stuff.
Mohammed, let me ask you a clarifying question. Because what the Assembly bill, it allows what I think has been allowed in San Francisco for the last year or so anyway. The question I have for you is if someone, let's say a retail dispenser wants to sell prepackaged goods like chips, for instance, right, or sodas, do they need any authorization from the Department of Public Health to be able to do that? One,
So the one thing we require them, so to make it easier, so they don't have to apply for a food permit, we have an exemption form to exempt them from applying if the products they sold are non-potentially hazardous prepackaged and left at 25 square feet total display or less. And they have to basically just draw a little bit of a floor plan to show us where it's gonna be displayed. They have to list all the products. And then that's when we give them authorization and say you're good to go.
got it. And does that business also need to be an authorized consumption?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's both.
Yeah, right now, that's the way our rules and regulations are written. If you have a consumption lounge, you can sell these products. But as a matter of fact, you can sell the products if you have any type of consumption permit, whether it be type A, type B, or type C.
Got it.
So some people have a type A, they don't have the actual smoking lounge, but because they already have a consumption permit from us, they can sell those products.
Oh, so there will be dispensaries that don't have a lounge, but because they have the consumption permit, they can.
Yeah, so like, for example, I think one of the apothecariums on market, they have a type A for edibles.
Oh, it's an edible, A is
Yeah,
an
so
edible.
like an edible could be a can of cannabis, right? So that they can drink on site, right? Could be just a regular edible, could be whatever, they just can't smell it.
So, and when you say non-hazardous food, I'm assuming that means non-refrigerated?
Correct, it's like non-perishable.
Okay.
Yeah, so like some people are even like, we told them that, they're like, can we do a cup, like a cup noodle soup? Well, if you have a hot water tower or whatever, if you want them to put it in there, then that's fine. We wouldn't consider that preparation.
And then, I know that some people were, some lounges were exploring having partnerships with restaurants to deliver food in their lounges. There would also nothing be that.
Yeah, and that's been allowed since day one.
Right.
We've never prevented, we told people they could bring in food if they want. It's all up to the, really, it's up to the operators if they want to allow it to do.
I'm glad Mohammed showed up.
One question, Mohammed, before we sort of let this one go, but just to make this a little more accurate, right? Let's
Yep.
say you are a retail dispensary, you do not, your business does not have enough space for a consumption line. But, so if that's the case, could you, as just a retail dispensary, apply for a consumption type A permit?
Yeah, like, of course, yeah, and there are places that are, that.
That's what I think I heard you say, right?
Yes.
So then in that, in the event that both those conditions are met, you are a retailer and you have the consumption permit, you don't need the physical floor space for consumption level, then you could, provided that that operator reaches out to the page and has the exemption form filled out, they could sell non-pack or prepackaged goods.
Yep.
That's very.
So I think that's a really big lift to the industry here. And that will really help dispensaries generate extra income. And I know they'll get creative with it, so.
Yeah, and there are dispensaries right now that are doing it, like Walgreens is doing it, Apothecaries, their new lounge. They're doing the food packaged products right now. I think, what's, the one on Mission?
Union Station.
Union Station, I think he has one.
I see it a lot also outside of San Francisco. They do well. And
Yeah.
most of those owners say with the packaged goods, they do quite well.
If I can ask, the taxes on those, is that just basic sales tax or is that anything above that?
That's a TTX question.
It's a non-cannabis item, so it won't be taxed, especially with the recent CDTFA.
Yeah, you won't have any, the excise
memo.
tax, for
Yeah.
example.
No, you're not paying it.
Yeah, and I think it's more for the folks that are in the lounges that just want some kind of sustenance. And they're, they can go get like a Coke or a vitamin water or, a million other things that they.
Mahana, just to be like totally clear for the folks listening and who might watch later, if somebody is looking for that exemption, the best thing to do is just reach out to Department of Public
Yeah.
Health and start the process.
So, yeah, it's real quick. Yeah, it's basically we send them over the exemption form and then they fill it out, give us a list of all the products they're selling. And then when I say display, that's just how much is displayed. You can have backstock. But the California Retail Food Code specifically says we can provide this exemption if it's that type of product. So the DCC and when they released and finally allowed for this, which they should have done from day one, which we kept asking them to do, they didn't specify non-potentially hazardous food. We made it non-potentially hazardous so that you were able to get this exemption and not have to pay for it. Does that make sense? Because if it's a whole nother ballgame if you start selling potentially hazardous food.
Yeah.
Right, so what they consider that is a low risk food.
And then this type A license, just to clarify that is a Department of Health license that any store that has a refrigerator where you can grab a soda out of would have to have.
I mean, you don't even, the type A is just for edibles, right? So if you had a seating area that you wanted people to sit around and they had, and I think now they even make cannabis wine or something like that in the bottles. They wanted to sell that, they could sell that and they could consume that on site. Type A, we're talking two different things. There's a type A, a type B, and a type C consumption permit, right? So type C is the smoking. If you do smoking, you can do a type A. You're obviously gonna do type A, but you'll get a type B. You don't have to pay for both of those permits, right? But if you had just the type A, for example, I'm just gonna keep going back to apothecary, because they have an area where they have a little seating area and it's kind of loungy. That's where they've kind of designated the area where people can consume edibles. That's what they can do, but because they have that type A consumption permit, they can also sell the prepackaged products.
Right, and that's what I was gonna get at. So what does a dispensary that currently doesn't have the type A? Do they apply at this OOC?
With us.
With you?
All the
That's my
consumption
question.
permits are with
Okay.
us. So they can apply for a type A and then also
Perfect.
start, so they could fill out the exemption form and do both.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
then people can drink beverages, eat products, whatever it is, just as long as it's not consumption like smoke.
Thanks, Mohan. I do have, by the way, Ray Law, Office of Cannabis. I do have a follow-up question about the waiver. Is there a fee associated with the waiver application?
No.
Nice.
Then not
Thank you.
people.
Mohammed, I told you.
Got some smiles.
Okay, so, that concludes my portion of the presentation. If there are any questions, happy to take them, but it sounds like we've resolved most of them. Anyone have any questions around AB 1775? I will say that in light of the next presentation, where we'll provide follow-ups to the event work we've been doing, I think that the timing for this is actually quite nice because it gives us the ability to test something out that we wouldn't be able to easily test out, even in the expanded pilot framework. So, more on that's coming, but I think the timing on this is actually pretty nice because we can test out what it would look like to have events in an indoor space where people can actually smoke in a way that's actually very publicly, well, that's very public and health conscious. So we'll get to that in a second, but any questions about AB 1775?
Right, thank you.
And this is its own agenda item, so we will, need to go to public comment on this item as well.
And if anyone has any questions, they can just email me. Or if you guys want to request the exemption, just shoot me an email.
Yes.
I think that was a really important piece of information.
Yeah.
I'll give them his.
We've been pushing the state since we started the cannabis, and they were pushing back forever until I think they got too much, like, people were requesting it.
Oh, but they're missing a sales tax too.
Yeah.
Thank you for your hard work and your persistence.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Thank
All right,
you.
you guys, good luck.
Shows up once, but not a
And Liz again, that's how you do it.
Thank you, everyone.
I mean, what's interesting is that AB 1775 now is catching up, at least with respect to that portion of being able to sell non-packaged or pre-packaged goods to what San Francisco has allowed for.
Do we want to open for public comment after this item?
I believe, yes, it's its own item, so.
Thank you.
Okay, for members of the public that are participating remotely, the instructions on how to participate are on your screen now. For any members of the public who are here in person who would like to provide a public comment specifically about the Cannabis Cafes bill, feel free to queue over here and we'll send you up to the podium one at a time. I'm just going to give the folks that are online a moment to indicate whether they would like to comment.
I don't mean to interrupt. Is the live event one going to be brought up as a separate agenda item?
So what we will be talking about directly after this is the possibility that was explored by the committee of expanding the temporary events pilot program, which would be more like,
Will that be open for comment?
that will be open for comment as well. If you mean specifically just the portion of AB 1775 that says that you can now have live performances, and then now would be the time to comment about that.
Got it.
Sorry, it's a little muddled. but,
Okay, I got you.
Just gonna double check if we have any online comments. Sir, feel free to step up to the podium and begin your public comment when you like. You'll have 3 minutes. State your name for the record if you'd like, and I'll ring this bell when you have 30 seconds remaining.
Hakeem, Golden Bean Cannabis Company. That was completely new information to me. That's awesome. That's a good workaround for quite a lot of people. I did have a couple more specific questions, and hopefully this is just something that raises eyebrows. If someone is doing a live event, let's just say they want to do a mock shift bar that serves cannabis drinks such as soda or like cannabis wine or whatever it is. As it's written now, who can apply for one of the temporary licenses and who cannot? You do not have a consumption lounge, but you basically, made a space available for the day. Would you be exempt or included in the new legislation? The old one?
Thank you very much for your public comment. We do have one online public comment on this item that I will read into the record. Hi, Scott. Are cannabis retailers allowed to give away food and beverages? It is my understanding that the law prevents us from selling food and beverages. Is it possible to clarify that? I will just remind all of our remote viewers that unfortunately we are not allowed to directly answer questions posed in public comment. Feel free to reach out to the Office of Cannabis at officeofcannabis@sfgov.org if you have any outstanding questions that you would like clarity on. It also looks like we do have an attendee online who would like to make a public comment. I see that your hand is raised. I am going to request to unmute you. Feel free to begin your public comment when you hear that request to unmute. And I will ring the bell when you have 30 seconds left, and I will mute you when your 3 minutes are up.
Angela White, Success Centers. I'm on vacation, but I just had to attend this meeting today. First of all, I wanted to thank the Oversight Committee. I'm sure hoping that we will have the same kind of committee in the future. I'm speaking that it's going to be voted in and we'll be able to continue this. Ali, you're doing an astounding job. Let's see. I wanted to also say that this thing with the cannabis in cafes or having food in cannabis, this is just something that really is uplifting to hear with all of the negative things that happens here with the cannabis. So I'm happy to say thank you for even considering thinking being a thought partner and making sure that these businesses survive. It's so important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comment. With that, Chairperson, I see no more hands raised online, no more comments in the chat, and no more individuals in person who would like to.
All right, thank you. Moving on to number 9, which is the temporary cannabis events pilot program expansion. Excited to hear.
Yes.
It's one of those titles, a little long.
Yeah.
Doesn't roll quite off the tongue.
We'll take that into consideration when we do the next for the program. So this up on screen here, great. Yes, as Director Patel just indicated, this is the long-awaited summary of there we go. Of a possible expansion to the temporary cannabis events pilot program here in San Francisco. So we're going to start off, I'll be presenting, I'll do a little summary of some of our efforts thus far. I'm going to bring up Hannah, who's here from our city performance team, to talk about the focus groups that were conducted. And then Director Patel and I will come back up to kind of summarize findings and next steps here in San Francisco. So as I was just saying, right, starting off, we're going to review the local and state regulations very briefly. I know the committee is probably extremely familiar with them at this point, but just mostly for our listeners. Then we're going to look forward at the possibilities that we talked about for expansion for the program. Then we'll have our presentation from our city performance team, and then we'll go back and gauge more interest, solicit a little feedback, and let you know what we believe the takeaways from these focus groups are. So again, brief summary on the proposed pilot program expansion. So anyone who is unfamiliar, before we dive in a little deeper, the City and County of San Francisco has a temporary events pilot program that is currently in place. This pilot program runs, I believe, until 2028 as it currently stands, and it essentially outlines certain types of events and then specific events that are already cleared for this pilot program. Historically, these are large outdoor events, so we're talking about grasslands at outside lands, talking about the 420 celebration at Hippie Hill, Folsom Street Fair, events like this, these very, very large citywide events, so to speak. And we've presented about this on multiple occasions. I don't have the dates offhand, but if you go back and you look at our recordings of the previous meetings, we've had a couple of different presentations on the pilot program. And so what we had presented on the past was a possible expansion of this pilot program that our office was exploring. This expansion was focused on indoor events that would have allowed for the sale of all types of cannabis, but would have only specifically allowed for the consumption of non-smoking / non-vaping cannabis, right? These events would still need to comply with all the local and state provisions, but otherwise these would be a new type of event, whereas in the past, the consumption was allowed for non-smoking, but also for smoking and vaping, and the event had to occur indoor or outdoors, excuse me. So the big change here is indoor and non-smoking. And just to refresh some of the reasons that this pilot program was proposed, or the expansion of the pilot program was proposed as it was. We just have a short list here of some of the restrictions that we've talked about in the past with these big events. There are restrictions on the locations, on whether or not, if you have a liquor license or a tobacco license, if you can even host one of these events. There's certainly no alcohol or tobacco allowed on the premises where these events are going to occur. There's ID checks, there's security presences, there's you need the POSI systems that connect to metric, you need public visibility to be obscured. So there are a ton of regulations. Again, we've had full presentations on all these regulations in the past. If folks are curious, I recommend you go and watch those video captures of the full presentations. But this is just a little refresher for everybody that's here, or for the folks that are listening online. And so in order to then gauge public interest, get some feedback, and outline like how this rollout might look, we partnered with the city performance team in order to run a series of focus groups. These focus groups were aimed at bringing together the public, cannabis consumers, cannabis operators, both cannabis event planners and non-cannabis event planners, venue owners and managers, right? So we had a really broad swath of people that came together for these focus groups. And then this specifically was asking about their views on non-smoking / non-vaping expansions to the temporary pilot program. So I think with that, I'm going to bring up Hannah from the city performance team, and she's going to take it away from there with more detail about how these focus groups went. And just arrow listed at it. It's great. Yeah.
It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I'm Hannah from Hand today. I'm with the city performance team at the controller's office. And just so you know, again, what city performance is, we're basically like in-house consultants for the city. So we work with departments like Office of Cannabis on particular projects. So departments will come and ask us for help, whether it's with something like a staffing analysis, or facilitating a series of working groups between departments, all sorts of things, best practices research. And in this case, OOC asked us to come and help them think through how could we expand the temporary pilot event program. It is a long name, but I think I'll get this. 3 months, I'm pretty sure I just said it wrong. It's just for months now. So back in September, we held 2 90-minute long focus groups. And we had, as Scott said, a variety of people in the room. We had community members, we had, venue operators and cannabis industry professionals. And so we really wanted to hone in on a few things in this meeting. So you can see our agenda here. We wanted to hear about what kind of events people were already thinking about hosting. We wanted to gauge interest in hosting and attending events to make sure that people really wanted this and it wasn't just something that OOC was pursuing because they thought it would be a good idea. And then we started to collect some pros and cons here, what people liked and disliked about the proposed program. And we also just wanted to gather any other thoughts around this program. So Scott did an excellent job summarizing this already, but just to, hit it again. So OSU is considering expanding its temporary event program to indoors and closed spaces. So that means no patios, because there needed to be walls enclosing everything to conceal the event from the public site, as we know, that's a big important rule. All cannabis products would be allowed to be sold, but only ingestibles would be allowed to be consumed at the event. So that's a yes for edibles, a yes for cannabis drinks, but a no for smoking, which also includes vaping. And so like all other cannabis events, the sale and consumption of alcohol would be prohibited. So in the next slides that we're going to walk through, I'm going to share some of the findings we've heard from these focus groups. So this is the feedback from participants as well as your recommendations being made about how OSC can think about this expansion. So starting off with some event ideas. So we did a quick brainstorm on sessions about what people would like to host, what they'd like to see. You can see there's quite a wide array of events, everything from film screenings to yoga to having cannabis education events. So that was really thought of discussing dosing with a live demonstration, hands-on dosing series. So quite a nice mix of different ideas that people were considering. So we asked our focus group a series of questions, starting with, were they interested in hosting a cannabis indoor event? A really fundamental question for this extension. And so you can see on screen the green diamonds were the cannabis industry professionals and the blue dots were venue representatives. And there's a bit of a spread, but the majority of folks were interested in hosting an event. So not only were most people somewhat interested or interested in hosting an event, but they also shared feedback about why they voted that way. So one participant reflected that we need to take any opportunity to increase cannabis business in the city. Another participant commented that as the program was designed, it was too limiting for the amount of work it would take to host a successful event. We also asked participants if they were interested in attending these events. So you can see an overwhelming amount of enthusiasm for attending the events. And so folks were interested in being able to join an immersive experience and take on some cannabis products there, but they felt limited by not being able to smoke. Others raised the point that this type of event doesn't need to be formalized because people can already consume cannabis and then go to events. So then we also asked, how interested is the public? So that would be your neighbor, your friends, your family, whoever, just generally other than the people in the room. And we saw, again, overwhelming support for these types of events. And so participants told us that they're hearing buzz about these types of things already. People are asking for this type of an event to occur. And so that this would really open up the door for both cannabis industry professionals and venue operators to be able to host these types of events. So, however, if you recall, there's a bit of a difference between the desire to host an event and then the demand to attend an event. So one cannabis industry professional said, quote, the industry is going to struggle to put on this event and make any money from it, end quote, because the bureaucracy and logistical challenges to get all the correct permits and then to find the right business to partner with to host a successful event is really hard. So taking a step back, we had some neat feedback there. So we asked participants, what did they like about the proposed program design? And folks shared that the proposed expansion is a step in the right direction towards legalizing cannabis consumption and increasing opportunities for smaller cannabis businesses. And they appreciated that the approach is opening the possibility of new events across the city rather than just relying on those really large, historically approved events. So we also got some feedback about ways to improve the program design. OOC has considered equity at the core of their program design. I just want to share that. We've been working with them for months now, and that's always been something they've mentioned since we started this engagement. The participants did flag some additional concerns. So they noted that there's the potential to expand the program, but it could exclude some people in the cannabis community. They also raised the concern that OOC should place a larger emphasis on supporting local San Francisco cannabis businesses, from prioritizing their ability to sell their products to ensuring that business is not diverted from the brick and mortar stores in the neighborhoods where events are taking place. So really thinking about how do we support our local businesses, get them involved in these events while supporting the stores that actually exist. Participants also reflected concerns about the administrative system being cumbersome to navigate at times. And we also heard that a large portion of the cannabis community does not partake in edibles and that they would be excluded from the benefits of this extension. So based on this feedback, participants made some recommendations for OOC and the city. So we heard that folks would like OOC to prioritize making a pathway for indoor smoking and vaping events. We heard that folks were interested in OOC ensuring that there would be funding opportunities to host these events. And that OOC could consider hosting a platform that could match interested event spaces with cannabis businesses to collaborate on hosting events to help ease some of the logistical burdens to put on an event. And streamlining state and local permit application processes and clarifying and minimizing any regulations when possible. So that's quite a large amount of information we heard back from these focus groups. They were really productive. They used a million based on them who needed to bring that. And anyone online, we really appreciated the input and that. I'll put that to Scott.
Thank you, Anna. I think Director Patel is mostly going to lead us through the next steps here, that kind of what the OOC is taking away from these focus groups.
Thanks, Scott. And before I even begin, I just want to thank the OOC. It's a tremendous amount of work organizing these focus groups, and that's really only scratching the surface of the way that they've supported us and the city as a whole. That's only the most recent, right? Organizing all of the city departments to even get a sense of whether this was something the city could support. That took months and months and months, and the city performance team was at the heart of that, continuing on and helping us with understanding whether what we think is feasible is actually something the community wants. They went through the heavy lift of making sure that there's a cross-representation, that we were actually getting feedback from different stakeholders, and that the questions were nuanced enough where we could get not just a yes or no, but more of a, okay, what might be a constructive way to meet some of the needs that people have expressed while understanding some of the limitations and ultimately making a decision, what's worth it, what's not worth it, and what's a way that we can continue to exist without taxing operators and industry members and the city as a whole for something that there may not be a lot of interest in. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. A lot of this was actually on Hannah's shoulders, the spearhead over. And it was just one of like 3 or 4 different projects that I know that has been consuming all the time. So first and foremost, thank you. I think what this does though is the focus groups paint a little bit of a hard picture to reconcile. Because on the one hand, we know that there's interest for these indoor events, but we heard resoundingly that it's kind of a non-starter if you can't smoke these events. Part of what Hannah didn't share is there were concerns from folks about what could happen if someone doesn't know how to consume an edible properly and they start eating a little bit and then there's no effect and then they keep consuming and then all of a sudden the clean slate and record that cannabis events have of having very few medical has now sort of ballooned. Because, it's just a very difficult thing to gauge how much someone can consume before they start feeling the effects. So that to me is pretty resoundingly possible and something that we are taking seriously and thinking about expansion. In an ideal world, there would be a way to do both indoor events with a small component that is not just limited to the authorized spaces in the city. But what we're sort of reconciling with and what we want to bounce some ideas on with this committee about is how do we square this feedback? Because on the one hand, we know that there's an appetite for indoor events and cannabis events more generally. And at the same time, we recognize that there isn't as much of an appetite. You can't have that smoking component. That leveled against the factors that in the city, you really right now cannot have an indoor event where you can smoke as well. There are local regulations that prohibit that. And there are state regulations that are going to make it very hard for our office to even issue a permit if we were able to cross that first hurdle, right? So we're kind of stuck in this strange place. But I think what's important is that we've established a baseline and these focus groups help us do that. They help us definitively say that there's an appetite for indoor events. That's really important. We didn't have that before. They also tell us that there is an appetite for these events if there is some component of smoking and it's indoor. So that's something that we want to build off of. As we think about what comes next, and this is why I said earlier, the timing of AB 1775 is really helpful because it's kind of a transitionary step to testing out the feedback that we're getting. It doesn't open up events to non-authorized consumption lounges, but it does give us a model to test out what do events look like in indoor spaces where people can smoke. And then that allows us to advance these conversations at the state level and even at the local level. What we are considering is using the next 6 to 12 months to get a better sense of what these events look like at consumption levels, and then continue to have the conversation with local partners and at the state level of what it would look like expanding to non-authorized consumption lounges, but spaces that have indoor outdoor spaces. So let's say it's an art studio that has a rooftop tent, right? What might be the parameters that we create to allow us to issue a permit for an event at that location while still squaring away this very challenging state regulation around the consumption being excluded from home, right? So we have some challenges, but I think that AB 1775 at least puts us in a position to make the case that, look, there's an appetite for these events, they actually work quite well, and we can learn from this and maybe be a little bit more flexible about how we apply the state regulation, or maybe create a carve out or an exception to it for indoor outdoor hybrid spaces. But before I go to questions, because I know there's a lot of energy around this, I suspected that any change in this space was going to be incremental, and this to me is a powerful step in that direction. We can continue to have the conversations around opening up indoor outdoor spaces, but I think it's a very uphill battle because of the state regulations and local restrictions on smoking in indoor spaces generally. But that's just me sort of giving it very clearly. I think that's where we are right now. I think the cannabis consumption lounges hosting events will give us a good test case, and then we continue to advance the conversation. But the focus groups kind of give a pretty clear and confusing picture all at the same time. Interested in indoor events, but you need smoking. There's some real concerns around edible consumption, and how does this impact local operators, vendors, and the activity?
Yeah, and if I could just expand a tiny bit, Deputy Director Law and myself attended both of these focus groups. We were able to hear directly from folks when they were making comments. And in those plot charts that Hannah had together for us, you could see that there was this strange dichotomy in the meeting between this high level of interest in, say, hosting or going to one of these events. But then when we would drill deeper into that interest, the interest seemed to stem more from this idea of like, well, it's something, right? It's something, it is some type of an expansion, right? So that was where the interest was coming from. But then when we drilled even deeper, I think we had multiple venue operators who, expressed the exact same idea, which was, let's say you own a concert hall and you're constantly having events there and things like that. All of their money is coming from the alcohol sales. So this idea that they would try to suspend their alcohol permit for one day in order to have a cannabis event, it was a complete non-starter for them. So even though they might have responded saying, hey, love this idea of the city trying to expand, love this idea of going to one of these events, At the same time, it was like, as a venue host, I would never sign off on one of these events. It's just a complete non-starter. Unless smoking is involved and unless there's some type of leniency with the alcohol stuff, it won't even get off the ground. And so it was very strange in the meeting because there was those two polar opposites ideas. But, when you think about it that deeply, I think it does make a lot of sense why there's the lukewarm kind of perception on the expansion.
Yeah, and when we hear that, our sort of paths are in two camps, right? There's what does the community want? And that was really important. Focus groups helped flesh that out, even if it was somewhat obscure. And then we translate that into what can we actually do with limited city resources, right? Like all of you know that the city is going through budget cuts and our office is impacted by that. So if we have already limited resources and it's shrinking, then what is the best way to direct those resources given what the appetite is? And where we're landing right now is the best way to spend our time is really leaning into AB 1775 and figuring out how to make the infrastructure around consumption lounges, having events, be a test case for this larger argument. Hey, the future is events and smoking is a part of that, but we need to figure out a way to make it possible beyond just the consumption lounge. If it doesn't work at the consumption level, it's probably not going to work very well at the indoor-outdoor spaces anyway. So, that's why I kept saying, I think 1775 is coming at a good time for us. But I think that some of the momentum and energy we had around expanding to this indoor model has been stymied, quite frankly, because of the general reaction. And then also what we know it would take to administer a program like this when the return on it for both the community and us would be fairly limited. So that's why these steps are here. We think it makes most sense to halt the expansion effort as we initially construed it, go back to the drawing board and use the next year to be able to make the case that these events do work in the indoor space. Smoke has to be a component of it. We learned that from X number of events. We want to, in parallel with this, explore the locations in the city that have indoor-outdoor configurations and work with the state and at the local to see if there's any wiggle room to be able to permit them. So that's where we are right now.
I think you guys, I think AB 1775 is really the only thing you should focus on, because, well, no, the rest of the.
Narrow it down.
No, I really think that's the only thing you should focus on, because between like the information that Mohammed provided today, that cleared up a lot of misconceptions around food consumption, between the fact that you can now consume food and smoke at a lounge, as well as promoted by a third-party promoter, you now have a business model where a promoter can promote an event at a dispensary lounge, a caterer can cater it, and people will buy tickets to attend it. You didn't have that before. So now there's a business model. I would try to match lounges with promoters. Those promoters can be temporary event license holders, but they don't even have to be anymore. So now the barrier is pretty low for equity applicants to go and promote a cool party once a month, once a week at a local dispensary lounge and partner up with them and take down that entrance money, the ticket sales, right? So I would really focus on that.
Well, I think this is a great time for us to sit down and sort of turn it over to you and continue these suggestions that you're even starting.
It's our last meeting, so we don't really have a whole lot of time.
TikTok. Quite a limited amount of time. So I think right now, if you want to have a dialogue around the constructive things that we can do in building out the consumption lounge model, that we're here to take.
Yeah, I mean, we have good local players like Lalela, who does great cooking. She's an equity applicant. She's a great chef. There's a lot of good local people that are going to benefit from this, that are currently throwing events in private spaces, right? So those can be drawn into the dispensaries and the lounges, because then they also have the support of brands, even some of us local brands, who definitely run a promo with a shop that's serving up our product that day, right? So I think that is really the way to leverage. And, you know, Matt is one of our legislators, so
Yes.
we could also leverage his
Yeah.
bill. He does need help with that, so.
Yeah. I had a question about live events. That's a piece of this AB 1775. And I don't know if maybe I just blinked and I missed it, but is there from the city performance any indication from, okay, well, what about having live events without smoking, right? I mean, I'm a majority person. I prefer smoking consumption. But, you know, we're talking about unraveling stigma here, right? This doesn't happen with a light switch. This takes almost tedious, very incremental change. And I'm wondering if live events without smoking is something that like could be part or could be interesting to.
I mean, that was the idea with what the pilot extension was going to be, right? But I think the one quote that really stuck out is I can eat an edible and go to any event.
Right.
And that is actually,
That is right.
that's how it goes. That's just,
Yeah.
you're not gonna change the consumer behavior.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I do it, I'll be at an event, but oh, this looks like fun, me at a double nonies here, right? So like, it's just, you're not gonna change that
You're
behavior,
right.
whereas it's smoking is a social gathering.
Yes.
You get together, it's ritualistic, that's why people like to
Correct.
do it together and share it together.
Yep.
So it's just, and I think, again, with the food deliveries, that being allowed, there's a lot of opportunity here to also drive traffic to those that need it, which are dispensaries that invested a lot into
Yes.
putting these lounges out.
Correct.
Yeah, if I can just touch on it briefly too, and feel free to chime in if you extrapolate off that. But yeah, I think the alcohol restrictions
Yeah.
were huge.
Right.
Because there were lots of venues that said, hey, we would love to sell
Sure.
cannabis drinks, you know, alongside of our alcoholic drinks, but we can't do that. And so, and then the idea of having to totally cease alcohol sales just to do that, right? It's such a small market share for them that I think as Ali is touching on, it made a lot more sense to say, hey, you want to see this small artist, they can go and put a concert on in a consumption lounge now, provided all the other stuff is buttoned up. And you can go to that consumption lounge, you can go to that retailer, you can consume your cannabis and you'll be fine. If you want to drink and go to a concert, go to one of the many establishments in the city that can already do that. But the fact that these two worlds cannot come together in that way is one of the biggest impediments.
So, and again, people can step outside of a bar and go smoke what they want to smoke. So there's just you're not really offering
Right.
anything special.
Yeah.
And you're going through all these hoops to offer
Right.
something.
Right.
Well, I think that's like, really the strength of the expanded program was giving more opportunities for vendors to have built-in audiences through these events, right? Is to support the local economy, local cannabis retail economy. But if the amount of time and energy that goes into creating that infrastructure is ultimately not going to be, just for lack of a better phrase, worth it, then that's not the best way to direct and steer our energy, right? I think that's part of the challenge. To Scott's point, the alcohol piece is big, but it's not even that they can't happen together. It's that they can't even happen one after the other. Because if you wanted to sell cannabis at an event, you would have to suspend your liquor license for a 24-hour period under current state law.
No one's going to.
You know, we had this, there was one proposal for a venue where it was like, oh, we sell alcohol up until the legal time, but then our venue stays open all night. Like, would it be possible for us to sell alcohol first and then later in the night sell cannabis?
Yeah, stoners stay up real late.
Yeah, right.
Not exactly the 2 to 4 a.m.
Yeah.
crowd.
I think there's an opportunity to build up the cannabis event space through the consumption lounge.
I agree, yeah.
To my point earlier, the consumption lounges right now are not necessarily structured to be able to prepare and sell food easily, but they are physically configured to be able to have live performances
Yeah.
or art tradition and work with third-party organizers.
They have tables to serve dinners. There's a lot they can do.
That's right.
Yeah,
There's a
food can be
lot.
brought in. It
And we
doesn't-
have that already in the city. We have these events happening. So it's gonna be just like we got most of us out of the shadows to come and be licensed operators. That's what we're gonna do with the event people now.
Yeah.
Make them create opportunities for them. They're already, a lot of the brands, statewide brands are all involved. Of course, I mean, you know, that's the lowest hanging fruit and will be the most impactful as well, in my opinion.
And if I can tag on that too, the ability to enrich the dispensaries as well and the brands, and I mean, everybody that's kind of been like struggling in our community, instead of having to co-opt with the venues and also make sure that they're profitable, keeping with us, I think might be a good starter. You know, we can focus on that, heck yeah.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate again, I think Director Patel put it very well, that this timing with AB 1775 is kind of perfect for this, failure is a strong word, but this movement away from expanding the 10th events program, right? And this realization that it might not work the way we want it to work. It seems like AB 1775 might fill that gap.
That's a great pivot, yeah.
And I know you.
I was just gonna say, like, it's great, all these ideas, just make sure that you're getting your entertainment commission permits that you need to get.
Yes.
You know, that was something that,
Yeah.
shadow events happening.
Well, that's what I think, what the most impactful thing would be for the OOC to really have a specific bulletin. Here's your type A consumption license, whatever you have to do, but those steps pale in comparison to getting a temporary event license. I
Yeah.
think most people will be really stoked to go through those
Oh, yeah.
rather
No,
simple
100%. I think what the complexity here will be is the consumption lounges and the frequency with which they want to host events and the kinds of events. Because the Entertainment Commission has different kinds of permits that are more or less involved depending on the kind of activity. And then the corresponding piece in all this is from the Planning Commission, you need different kinds of uses depending on the frequency, well, a different kind of use depending on the frequency of events. If it's one-off, then it's a very different conversation than if it is occurring every week, right?
Yeah, but you can have like multiple one-offs in a year, right?
Potentially, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right now, is we're having conversations with the planning department, and we're having conversations with the entertainment commission to actually just try and chart out what the different options might be for the consumption lounges that are already here in the city. That is, I think that's something that we have an appreciation for that maybe even the industry doesn't as much, because we get calls from other jurisdictions regularly for how we've set up our consumption lounges.
Mhm.
And that's because most jurisdictions don't actually have those already configured. We have 11 that are already operational here and another handful that are already in the queue. So if we're talking about 15 potential locations over the next.
It's a lot of venues,
year,
yeah.
It's a lot of venues.
Yeah.
And we're spread out across the city.
And, but these entertainment, permits and fees, and aren't they based on live performance versus, like, just playing music, isn't it? Like,
There's like,
there's like different tiers, right?
Yeah, there's different tiers, and even with certain permits, if you know you're gonna be hosting, like, say, 4 events in 1 year, you can apply as a bundle, so that way for like certain permits, you only pay 1 fee.
Right.
Instead of applying for one-offs for completely, you still have to pay that, you know, however many dollars it is each time. If you know you're gonna host, it doesn't have to be the same event each time, but you know you're gonna hold 3 different events in the
I
year.
guess my question is, what's an event? Does there have to be live entertainment
A
or,
DJ
okay,
at, you know, one of these events, that's considered live entertainment.
bingo?
Okay.
Yeah,
It might be,
unfortunately,
I'm not sure yet.
Okay, but that,
Dylan Rice
No.
would know.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
but I think
absolutely.
like clarifying that is also really
Yeah.
important for for the dispensary owners to understand that, hey, if somebody's pitching a bingo night to me, it's a lot less work than if somebody's pitching live piano sing or whatever, singer-songwriter.
and I think that's where we're gonna focus a lot of our energy, is just making the processes clear depending on the kind of activity and like the combination of things that someone might be interested in,
Right.
especially if it's like live versus DJ music, amplified sound versus
Film
live,
screening.
like, you know, that's what we're working on now. I think what would be even, like, what would be helpful to us is if the committee, as its sort of final act, made a recommendation charging us with bringing clarity and creating materials to elucidate what it means to host an event, depending on X, Y, or Z, right? Like,
Glad you write that
some kind
down,
of
so you
Yeah.
have the wording already.
Checklist, because I knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, happy to do that. That's something I think will help, to your point, 11 lounges and some more time.
Got a motion?
Yeah, real quick, any other questions about, focus groups, pilot program, anything like that?
No, I
We
was,
do have to take public comment.
And we,
yeah,
Right,
well,
yeah.
we'll put the motion on, then we can take public comment, right?
Okay.
So, Shay, go for it.
We'd like to move to charge the Office of Cannabis to explain clearly the things that Scott's about to say.
Create documentation and guidelines.
Scott, we can preamble it as well, but charging the Office of Cannabis to redirect its energy on expanding the temporary pilot program to now understanding what the infrastructure for creating a entertainment model for cannabis lounges would look like.
So moved.
That's for-
Yes, yeah.
Throw them
Wait a second.
Yes, you
Okay,
can
I'd
second.
love to second that as well.
okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Down.
And with that, let's open up for public comments, please.
Yes, of course. For members of the public who are watching remotely, who would like to provide a public comment, the public comment instructions will be on your screen momentarily. Here we are. Yes, for anyone online who would like to make a public comment, please refer to the public comment instructions that are on the screen now. For anyone here in person who would like to make a public comment, feel free to step up to the podium. Again, this is public comments about the temporary cannabis events pilot program expansion. You'll have 3 minutes to provide a public comment. I'll ring this bell when you have 30 seconds left. And feel free to state your name for the record if you like, and step up to the podium and begin your public comment.
Hello, my name is Indiana Davis. I'm in the process of opening a non-storefront retail. I love all the work today and the fact that y'all come all the time, thank you for putting the work. But with this specific bill and the decision to kind of pivot and see what's going to happen with the consumption lounges that are already open, what will be your metric for success? That's what I would like to. So how we're going to gauge that, what metrics you're going to use, and then like make that available at the next meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your public comment. I will check. We have any comments coming in online. Sorry, it's split between the two computers. I do not see any hands raised online, and I do not see any comments in the chat.
Great, that concludes agenda item number 1.
Oh, well, you want to hold the vote?
Oh, yeah, we have a vote, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, can we get a
So-
vote for the motion?
Vote for the motion to, for the OOC to explore the necessary prerequisites for events to be held under AB 1775 so that industry professionals can more effectively, make those events happen. Chairperson Ali Jamali.
And
Aye.
that's the last part, and pivoting away from the expand.
Yes, and moving away from, for this, instead of an expansion of the temporary pilot events program. Chairperson Ali Jamali, how do you vote?
Aye, thank you.
Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 10 is currently unfilled. Seat 11, Apollo Wallace is unfortunately absent today. Seat 12, Bakari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nagales Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 15 is also unfilled, and seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, how do you vote?
Aye.
With 6 ayes and 0 nays, that motion passes, and the OOC will work on putting that stuff together.
Thank you. That concludes agenda item number 9. I'm not sure about agenda item number 10, really. But I did want to just take a minute and just say it's been a real privilege to work with all of you. I think it's 3 terms now. We did, I often argue with Nikesh how much of an impact we made or we didn't make. And going through like 3 years of notes, I realized you're right. We did really we made some impact. I think north of $5 million in grant money was distributed. We changed the gross receipt tax with Raphael Mendelman, which was, I think, the only tax to be suspended, only cannabis tax ever to be really suspended by anyone. With the help of Mahanit, we ensured that people can safely smoke cannabis indoors. It got carved out from a public health department, from a public health law. And they now use that as a carve out for many laws. So I guess we did do quite a bit together. So thanks for your trust. It's been a pleasure. And if this committee gets to go again next year, hopefully we'll have just as good iterations as the last 3.
We'd love to see you all back again.
Fun. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So since we have no future agenda items, I think adjourn.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, office. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Great working with you.
Right.
Yeah.